Welcome to Calvary Fellowship in Manchester, New Hampshire. We meet here in Manchester every Sunday to worship in song and in the Word of God. We hope you are encouraged by the music and the teaching.
Great are you, Lord, mighty in strength. You are faithful, you will ever be. We will praise you all of our days. It's for your glory, we offer everything. Raise your hands, all you nations, shout to God, all creation. How awesome is the Lord Most High. We will praise you together, for now and forever. How awesome is the Lord Most High.
Today we're going to continue in the Gospel of John. Now last week we looked at the first sign was at the wedding at Cana, and we saw that basically what Jesus did is he went back and affirmed how things began. He affirmed the sanctity of marriage. And so the first sign had to do with the joy of marriage, the fact that God had created marriage. The state didn't do it. It isn't just done for tax purposes. God created marriage, and Jesus, of course, affirms that later on when he asked him about divorce. And he said, that's not how it was in the beginning, and he explained that for us, this cause a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife and become one. So the first miracle had to do with the beginning of creation, had to do with man and woman and marriage. His second sign, and this sign actually, in the other Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they report this incident much later. I remember when John's writing his Gospel, he said there's many signs that I could have written about, but there wouldn't be enough volumes to hold it. So he picked out certain particular signs that he thought would bring people to a knowledge of who Christ is, because his whole ministry is come and see. And so he takes an event, now we don't know whether it occurred when he reported it or whether they reported it later as an afterthought, but he puts it into this Gospel in the second chapter as the second sign that he reports on, and it has a different function. The function of this one is to stress the need for proper worship. So he's going to be dealing with the deterioration of the church at that time, the Jewish faith, where they had moved away from a heart for the Lord and moved into going through the motions of religion, much like we see today. And so he's going to be dealing with that on the Passover. And it's also interesting that he puts us here that the beginning of Jesus' ministry begins with the Passover. And this is public ministry. And his public ministry ends with the Passover. So it sort of brackets the fact that he is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. So he begins in verse 11 we went through last week. That was the wedding at Cana. And then verse 12 just says, after that they went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brothers, and they didn't stay there very long. He picks up in verse 13 and says, now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now the location of Jerusalem is such that no matter which direction you come from, you go up to Jerusalem. So it has this hillside location. And he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business. Now, when it refers to temple here, it uses two different words. When he's referring to temple here, the word he's using refers to the general temple area, and essentially it's the court of the Gentiles before you go into the physical building of the temple. And there people were selling animals that are used for sacrifice. And basically what he's dealing with is easy religion. Instead of people having to raise their own bullock and bring it with them on this trip to Jerusalem, or their own goat, or even their own pigeons, they would come and just buy them. So you sort of bought cheap grace. You bought your offering when you got there rather than having to raise it and take it with you. So we see people being able to simply deal with the religious ritual without actually putting a great deal of time into it. Now we've sort of carried that into the future, and we have something called indulgences that the Catholic Church created. And it's basically the same principle. It's sort of interesting they call them indulgences because we usually identify the word indulgence with doing something beyond what you should be doing. getting overindulging in something. And so what they did, they created a principle by which people could pay either in advance for their sin or by paying for masses or saying X number of prayers. They were going to pay for the sins rather than actually being humbled by the Lord and actually repenting of the sin. You could actually buy in advance an indulgence. So it's very much like they were doing at the time. They substituted a simple way of carrying out the ritual without actually being focused on the effort that goes into repenting and being prepared for it. In other words, a trip to Jerusalem on the High Holy Days should have involved a long period of preparation. If you had to raise a young bullock and it's your best you're going to bring to the Lord, there's a lot of thought that goes into that. You're realizing, okay, this is the work I put to this. God has actually put a lot of work into me, and he's developed me, and I'm just responding to his love. Instead, you just show up, you get the cheapest flight there. In this case, you rode the cheapest transportation you got there, and then you just bought whatever you needed for the offering when you got there. And of course, the money changers, what they were doing is they would not accept the coin of the realm, which would be Roman currency. Instead, they would make you exchange it for temple coins, which could be used for the offering. And there again, of course, whenever you change money, what happens is somebody's making money in between. The guy that's doing a rate of exchange. When you switch it back, if you had extra coins left when you were leaving Jerusalem, you have to trade it back. They'd make money again when they sold your Roman coins back again. So that still goes on, that same practice. So basically, this is what he was dealing with. And so Jesus was so upset by this. When he saw it, it says he found in the temple those who sold. It said, verse 50, he said, and he made a whip of cords. Now basically, he literally took cords that were there, probably that they had brought the cattle in with or whatever, put them together, wove them together. He didn't just pick up a whip. He actually made one. That's how angry he was. He just weaved these things together, made it basically like a cat o' nine tail, made a whip out of it. It said, and he made a whip of cords. He drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overturned the tables. Now, we were in Rome a few years ago. Pam had to restrain me because I want to do the same thing. If it had worked for Jesus, but you're in St. Peter's. You're in the major basilica of the Roman Church, and people are selling videos and postcards within the church. And that's ridiculous. I mean, if you want to do it out, at least they were doing it out in the courtyard. They do it in the building. You can't bring cameras in. You can't take pictures. They're going to sell you pictures. And then they have little coin-operated things in front of every one of the little statues that you can put a coin in, and you'll get a light for a period of time in front of every statue. So by the time, if you visited all of them, by the time you get through, you'd probably drop 30 or 40 euros. And for what? This is show and tell time. And, that's ridiculous, but that's what's still going on. So he was so upset with that, he turned them over, and then he said to those who sold the doves, and it's interesting he picked on particularly the ones who sold the doves, because who were they taking advantage of? They're taking advantage of the very poor. The poorest people brought doves. So they're really taking advantage of them too. They may have actually brought a dove with them, but the priest inspected, oh no, this one has a blemish. Now we just happen to have a perfect one here, we can sell you. So they're taking advantage of the poor. They're milking the poor. And all too often, that's what organized religion does. They take advantage of the poorest people. And they're the ones that they lean on and have signed pledge cards and all that sort of nonsense. And they sort of overlook the wealthy. As long as they give out of their abundance, they're perfectly happy with that. They acknowledge them. They put plaques up to them and all that. But the poor people are sacrificing, and they get very little in response to it. So it's the ones with the doves that he particularly got upset with. He said, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. This is supposed to be a house of prayer. This is my Father's house. You're coming to worship God. You're not here in business. Then it says, his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house has eaten me up. Now here when he's referring to the house, he's using the word for the actual temple, the physical building as well. And they remembered, the zeal for your house has eaten me up. And this is basically what Jesus is saying. Now, the zeal I have for my Father's house, even though initially God didn't want a house built. Remember he said when David wanted to build a house for the Lord, he wanted to build a temple. He said, God doesn't dwell in buildings made with hands. But he allowed Solomon to build it.